The stars stretched endlessly across the void, an ocean of light and darkness where civilizations rose and fell like the tides. In the grand scale of the cosmos, humanity was small, a fleeting ember against the cold infinity. Yet history had shown time and time again that the strength of a species was not determined by size, nor by the vastness of their dominion. It was forged in the fire of struggle, in the relentless defiance of extinction. The essence of a powerful HFY story lay in this truth. Not in making humanity invincible, but in revealing the unyielding spirit that made them unstoppable. Every great story was built upon a foundation of struggle and triumph, of lessons learned through hardship and victories earned through sacrifice. Humanity's greatest asset was never brute force, nor was it technological supremacy. It was something deeper, something carved into the very essence of their being: resilience, adaptability, and an insatiable hunger to push forward, no matter the cost. There were civilizations that had long since perfected the art of war, species whose lifespans stretched across millennia, and empires that wielded power so vast that a single command could erase a planet from existence. To them, humanity was a primitive anomaly, a species barely out of its cradle, still grasping at the fringes of the galactic stage. And yet, in the face of superior forces, when other species would kneel, humanity stood. When logic dictated surrender, they fought. When the universe presented insurmountable odds, they found a way. It was never about sheer strength. It was about adaptation. A truly compelling HFY story did not rely on making humanity the undisputed rulers of the galaxy from the outset. Instead, it thrived in the tension of conflict, in the slow, grinding ascent from insignificance to dominance. This rise was not granted. It was earned, and it came at a cost. The best HFY stories understood that victory without struggle was meaningless. The first law of such stories was that humanity must start from weakness. There could be no story if there was no struggle. Perhaps they were underestimated, dismissed, as unworthy of notice by an empire that had ruled for 10,000 years. Maybe they were seen as a curiosity by beings of immense intelligence, as simple creatures whose brief lives were spent in foolish ambition. Or perhaps they were outright despised, feared for something they themselves had not yet understood, a trait that set them apart from all others. The second law was escalation. Conflict did not arise in an instant. It brewed, grew, and evolved. The HFY narrative thrived in the slow burn, in the rising tension that made every battle, every decision, and every sacrifice matter. It was not enough for humanity to simply emerge victorious. They had to claw their way up, inch by inch, through strategies born of desperation and victories paid for in blood. The third law was justification. Humanity could not be handed superiority. They had to prove it. And proof did not come in the form of overwhelming firepower or divine intervention. It came in the moments where they outthought their enemies, where they endured what others could, not where they turned their own weaknesses into strengths. There was no deus ex machina, no miraculous force that made them powerful without cause. Everything was earned. A well-crafted HFY story did not depict humanity as gods among mortals, nor did it reduce them to simple warriors with nothing but brute force. It showed them as something unique, a species defined by contradiction, by their endless capacity for both destruction and creation, for compassion and ruthlessness. It was their willingness to evolve, to adapt, to sacrifice, that made them powerful. The best stories understood that individuals mattered, but the collective mattered more. A single brilliant strategist, a lone soldier standing against impossible odds, a scientist unlocking the secrets of the universe. These were important. But no HFY story was complete without the larger force behind them. It was never just about the one who fired the shot, but the millions who stood beside them. A truly powerful HFY story was not simply one where humanity triumphed. It was one where they had to fight for it, where their victories were hard-won, their struggles immense, and their enemies more than just faceless obstacles. The adversaries they faced had to be real, with their own strengths, their own philosophies, their own reasons for standing against humanity. And yet, through every clash, through every war, through every desperate battle, one truth would always emerge: humanity was never meant to kneel. The cosmos had seen 1,000 empires, 1,000,000 wars, 1 billion species that had risen and fallen in the endless cycle of existence. But it had never seen anything quite like humanity. And that was why, against all odds, against all reason, against forces that should have crushed them long before they took their first steps among the stars, they endured. The cold void of space was indifferent. It did not care for the rise and fall of empires, nor did it weep for the countless civilizations that had been lost to time. It was a silent witness to eternity, an endless abyss where only the strong survived. And yet, strength alone was never enough. A species could build fleets that blotted out the stars, could wield technology so advanced that entire worlds bent to their will. But if they lacked the fire to push forward, to defy, to endure, then they were already doomed. This was where humanity's true power lay, not in their weapons, not in their numbers, not in their fleeting grasp of technology, but in the fire that burned within them, that defiance, that refusal to accept their place in the grand order of things. The galaxy had long since learned the rules of war. Empires did not fight for honor. They did not battle for survival. Conflicts were won before they even began, dictated by calculations, probabilities, and cold, merciless logic. Victory belonged to those who wielded overwhelming force, to those who had spent millennia perfecting their control over lesser beings. And so, when humanity first stepped onto the interstellar stage, they were met with dismissal. To the great empires, they were nothing more than a primitive species with misplaced ambition, another upstart civilization that would either kneel or perish, just as so many before them had. Their first contact was not one of diplomacy, nor of curiosity. It was a test. The galaxy had seen this pattern before. Some species begged for mercy. Some tried to fight and were crushed beneath the weight of history. A few were allowed to exist in subjugation as long as they understood their place. But humanity? They broke the pattern. They refused to kneel. They refused to surrender. And when their worlds burned, when their fleets were shattered, when they stood on the edge of annihilation, they did something no empire had anticipated. They adapted. Unlike the ancient civilizations, bound by their traditions and doctrines, humanity had no sacred rules. They had no unbreakable codes that dictated how war must be fought. They learned from every defeat, turning their losses into lessons, their failures into weapons. They did not fight for conquest. They fought for survival, and survival was something humanity understood better than any other species. The first war against humanity should have been over in days. Instead, it dragged into months, then years. The empire that sought to crush them realized too late that they had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that the humans would break like every species before them, that they would recognize their inferiority and submit. But humanity did not break. They adapted. They evolved. They fought as no species had ever fought before, not with superior technology, nor with sheer numbers, but with the one thing that had carried them through every dark chapter of their history: their ingenuity. Their tactics were unpredictable, their strategies unorthodox. Where other species fought by the book, humanity rewrote it. When the enemy moved to outflank them, they turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. When resources ran thin, they found ways to make the impossible work. They built weapons out of desperation, turned salvaged wrecks into warships, and fought with a ferocity that sent shivers down the spines of those who had once seen them as mere primitives. It was here that the true power of an HFY story revealed itself, not in making humanity invincible, but in showing how they refused to accept defeat. Every battle lost was a lesson learned. Every victory was paid for in blood, in sweat, in sacrifice. They were not stronger. They were not smarter. They were not faster, but they were relentless. That was why they won. That was why the galaxy, once so certain of their insignificance, began to fear them, because humanity was not like the others. They did not accept their place in the universe. They did not believe in the concept of an unstoppable force. To them, there was no such thing. There was only the next fight, the next challenge, the next battle to overcome. And that was why, against All odds against enemies who should have crushed them long before they even became a threat, they endured. The tides of war had shifted. What was once a foregone conclusion, a minor species crushed under the weight of an empire, had become a nightmare scenario. The humans were still outmatched in every conceivable way. Their fleets were smaller, their technology was inferior, their worlds were barely holding together under the relentless sieges, and yet, they were winning. Not in the way the great empires measured victory. There were no glorious conquests, no decisive battles where humanity stood triumphant. But they endured. They learned. They turned every defeat into an opportunity, every setback into fuel for something greater. The enemy, once so certain of their dominance, began to hesitate. At first, they had mocked humanity's desperate attempts to fight back. They had watched with amusement as the lesser species flailed against their superiority, using outdated weapons and crude tactics. But as the war dragged on, something changed. The Empire's admirals no longer laughed. Their analysts no longer spoke in confident predictions of an inevitable victory. Instead, reports spoke of entire fleets lost to battles they should have won. Humanity was never supposed to be a threat. And yet, when they fought, they did not do so as other species had. There were no grand duels between champions. No ritualistic adherence to codes of honor. Humans did not care for such things. They fought to survive, and survival had no rules. It was the first time the Empire had encountered an enemy who fought without hesitation, without restraint. They burned entire planets just to deny the enemy a foothold. They lured fleets into traps where they willingly sacrificed entire squadrons, knowing that the greater victory lay beyond the immediate battle. They hacked into enemy systems, used their own weapons against them, turned supply lines into battlefields, and strongholds into tombs. For every human ship destroyed, 2 more appeared. Cobbled together from wreckage, outfitted with whatever weapons could be salvaged. No battle was clean, no war was predictable. The Empire had fought thousands of wars over countless millennia, but never like this. Never against an enemy who could not be broken. It was not their strength that made them terrifying. It was their refusal to die. The turning point came when the Empire deployed its purge fleets. Massive armadas designed not for battle, but for extermination. These were not forces meant to conquer, nor to subjugate. They were meant to erase, to burn entire systems from history, ensuring that nothing remained of the species that dared to defy them. The humans did not run. They did not surrender. They met the purge fleets head-on. Entire colonies fought to the last breath, not for victory, but for time. They turned their planets into death traps, their orbital stations into fortresses of defiance. Civilians took up arms, fought alongside their soldiers, refused to give an inch even as their skies burned. And then, against all logic, against all reason, the purge fleets fell, not because they were outgunned, not because they were outmaneuvered, but because they were afraid. For the first time in their history, the Empire faced an enemy that did not fear annihilation. An enemy that did not break under overwhelming force. An enemy that, even in their darkest hour, fought like they had already won. It was then that the whispers began. The lesser species of the galaxy, long accustomed to the rule of the great empires, began to watch. They saw the fire that burned, within humanity, the relentless defiance that no other race had ever dared to show. And they began to wonder. What if humanity was right? What if the great empires were not gods, but merely tyrants too arrogant to believe they could ever be challenged? What if the galaxy did not belong to those who had held it for millennia, but to those willing to fight for it? The Empire saw the shift. They saw their dominion begin to tremble at the edges, saw the once enslaved worlds begin to rise, emboldened by the impossible defiance of a species that should never have mattered. And for the first time, they understood the truth. This was not a war of conquest. This was the beginning of something far greater. The Empire had never known fear, not truly. Fear was for the weak, for those who lacked power, for those who had never grasped the reins of the galaxy and bent it to their will. Their rule was eternal, their dominance unquestioned. But now, in war rooms across the empires, Core worlds, fear had taken hold. Not in the form of panic, no. The rulers of the empire were too proud, too ancient for such base emotions. Instead, it crept into their calculations, their strategies, their projections of the war's inevitable. And, because that end had not come, humanity should have been broken. Their fleets should have been shattered, their worlds reduced to dust. It was how it always was. The weaker species resisted for a time, but eventually they bowed. They pleaded. They submitted to the truth of imperial rule. But humanity? They fought as if submission had never been an option. The Empire's admirals no longer looked at star maps with the certainty of conquerors. Now they saw battlefields stretching endlessly, conflicts without a clear resolution, wars that could not be won through sheer firepower alone. Humanity was outmatched in ships, in numbers, in raw technological superiority. And yet, they adapted. They turned war into something it had never been before. A game of uncertainty. Where the Empire moved predictably, humanity struck where they should not have been. Where the Empire's fleets followed their ancient doctrines of war, humanity shattered. Those doctrines with strategies that defied logic. They used deception at a scale no species had dared attempt. Their ships would feign destruction. Their distress signals luring enemy vessels into traps within traps. Where debris fields turned into minefields, where asteroids were not dead rock, but hidden battle stations. They vanished where they should have been cornered. They returned when they should have been destroyed. And then came the worst of it. The one thing the Empire had never prepared for. The stolen weapons. Humanity did not fight wars to prove superiority. They did not cling to tradition, to sacred battle tactics passed down over generations. No. They fought for one purpose alone, to win. And to do that, they took what was not theirs. The Empire's technology, once so far beyond human understanding, had been hijacked, reverse-engineered, repurposed into something even its original creators could not predict. Human warships, once crude and barely capable of holding the line, now wielded stolen Imperial weapons against their own makers. Planetary defenses, systems once designed to keep humanity trapped, had been turned outward, striking at their enemies with devastating precision. The Empire's strength had become its weakness. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity rewrote the rules of war. What had begun as a war of survival had become something greater. The whispers that had once spoken of defiance had become shouts of rebellion. The oppressed species of the galaxy, long bound in chains of fear, began to see the truth. If the Empire could bleed, it could fall. And if it could fall, then perhaps the galaxy did not belong to the ancients who had ruled it for so long. Perhaps it belonged to those willing to fight for their place among the stars. The Empire saw this, and for the first time in its long and terrible history, it came to a realization that shook it to its very core. This was no longer a war. This was an uprising, a reckoning. And humanity had become something far more dangerous than an enemy. They had become a symbol. The Empire had underestimated many things about humanity. Their ability to adapt, their capacity for war, their refusal to submit. Each had been a mistake. Each a flaw in the Empire's perfect understanding of conquest. But nothing had been as dangerous as their ability to inspire. The Empire's grip on the galaxy was no longer slipping. It was fracturing. Rebellions, once isolated and crushed with ease, had spread like wildfire. Worlds that had suffered under Imperial rule for generations now dared to fight back, fueled by the knowledge that humanity had done the impossible. And for the first time, the Empire did something it had never done before. It panicked. What followed was an act so brutal, so calculated in its horror, that even the most loyal subjects of the Empire faltered. The Empire's rulers, desperate to break humanity before their example spread too far, turned to the one strategy they had always held in reserve: extermination. It was not enough to win this war. Not anymore. Victory, even if achieved, would not erase the idea that humanity had planted in the minds of the oppressed. And so, the Empire sought to erase humanity itself. The attack came without warning. Imperial fleets, vast beyond counting, bypassed humanity's defenses with a singular purpose. Not to fight, not to conquer, but to destroy. Entire human colonies, thriving and full of life just moments before, were turned to ash. There was no grand battle, no final stand, only death. The Empire did not issue demands, nor did it offer humanity the chance to surrender. It simply struck, wiping out entire populations in the span of hours. Worlds burned, billions died, and when the flames settled, the Empire did not issue a statement of victory. There was nothing left to say. The message was clear. No one defied the Empire and lived. But as the galaxy recoiled in horror, as once loyal subjects looked upon the devastation and saw monsters where rulers had once stood, the Empire failed to understand the truth of what it had done. Because if there was one thing that humanity understood, one lesson written in the bones of their history, it was this: some things could never be forgiven. The void was silent, not the peaceful silence of a distant star system untouched by war, but the heavy, suffocating silence that followed unspeakable tragedy. Across the remnants of human space, where once thriving colonies had been reduced to fields of ash and blackened, Earth, the survivors did not mourn, not in the way the Empire expected. There were no pleas for mercy, no desperate attempts at negotiation. There was only rage. The Empire had believed that extermination would break humanity, that the survivors, faced with the horror of absolute destruction, would finally understand the futility of resistance. That they would kneel, as all others had. But humanity did not kneel. They had never been a species built for submission. They were not like the conquered, the beaten, the species who had grown accustomed to chains. They were something else, something the Empire had never encountered in all its long history. And now, they had become something worse than an enemy. They had become an unstoppable force. The survivors did not retreat. They did not scatter to the edges of the galaxy in search of safety. There was no safety left, and so they sought something else: vengeance. In hidden shipyards buried deep within the remains of their burned worlds, humanity rebuilt. Not with desperation, but with an unyielding, terrifying focus. Their weapons, once mere shadows of the Empire's might, became something new, something born from anger and necessity. Their warships, once clumsy compared to Imperial designs, were now predators, built with a singular purpose: to destroy. They no longer fought to survive, they fought to eradicate, and the galaxy watched in silence as the first great fleet of humanity's vengeance took shape in the darkness between the stars. The first strike came swiftly, and it came without warning. Imperial fleets stationed at the edges of occupied human space, fleets meant to contain the last remnants of resistance, were wiped from existence in a matter of hours. Where once humanity had fought like insurgents, striking from the shadows, now they fought with the full fury of a species that had nothing left to lose. They did not merely defeat their enemies, they shattered them. Their ships moved unlike anything the Empire had ever seen, using tactics no other species could predict. They did not adhere to doctrine, did not follow the careful, methodical strategies that had ruled interstellar war for centuries. Instead, they were relentless. Imperial fleets, vast and mighty, found themselves hunted like wounded prey. Supply lines burned, outposts fell without a word of surrender. The Empire, so accustomed to slow, grinding wars of attrition, now faced an enemy that attacked with unpredictable, terrifying precision. And then came the true horror. Humanity had learned from its enemy. It had taken Imperial technology before, but now it had done something far worse. It had improved it. The weapons used to burn human worlds had been captured, studied, and repurposed, and now those weapons were turned against their creators. Entire Imperial strongholds, fortresses that had stood for millennia, were wiped away in a single night. Worlds that had once been the beating heart of Imperial power vanished in fire and ruin. The Empire, which had ruled for thousands of years, which had crushed countless civilizations before humanity had even reached the stars, now faced something it had never known before. A species that refused to be broken. A species that would not stop. A species that had turned war into a force of nature. As the Empire's highest rulers looked upon the burning wreckage of their once great fleets, They felt something they had never felt before. Fear. Because this was no longer a war. This was judgment. And humanity would not stop until their enemies understood, in the final gasping moments of their rule, what it meant to lose everything. The war no longer had front lines. There were no more battlefields, no more systems to hold, no more defensive positions to fall back to. The Empire, once an unshakable force that had dominated the galaxy for millennia, was now a cornered beast, dying, gasping, bleeding across the void. There was no mercy to be found. Humanity's vengeance had become unstoppable. They did not fight for peace. They did not seek a truce. The Empire had taken everything from them, their homes, their families, their very existence. And so, humanity had given them a single lesson in return. Imperial fleets, once the terror of the galaxy, had been reduced to scattered remnants. Their greatest warships, monuments to their unchallenged rule, now drifted as wreckage, shattered against the fury of an enemy they had never truly understood. It was not just military collapse. The very foundations of the Empire, its rule, its fear, its unchallenged dominance, had eroded. Worlds once loyal to the Empire now stood silent, watching as their overlords fell one by one. Some rebelled, some simply refused to fight, and some, looking upon the ruin of what had once been invincible, surrendered before the battle even began. But humanity did not accept surrender. There would be no treaties, no negotiations, no empire left standing to rise again. The final days came with a terrifying inevitability. The imperial core worlds, those ancient bastions of power where rulers had sat upon golden thrones and dictated the fate of entire species, now faced the full force of human wrath. They begged. The same rulers who had unleashed genocide upon human worlds, who had commanded the slaughter of billions without hesitation, now pleaded for mercy. They offered reparations. They offered peace. They swore that they had been wrong, that it had all been a mistake, that they would do anything to stop the slaughter. But humanity did not respond. The fleets came in silence, engines burning with the cold, relentless fire of justice. And then, without a word, they unleashed the storm. Planet by planet, the imperial core burned. Great citadels, symbols of their eternal rule, crumbled beneath relentless bombardments. Cities, once home to the wealth and power of the Empire, fell into ruin, their people fleeing in terror. But there was nowhere left to run. For every world the Empire had erased, a dozen of its own were turned to dust. For every life stolen from humanity, an entire imperial bloodline was wiped from history. There would be no survivors, no future for an empire that had once believed itself unchallenged. And as the final imperial throne world fell, as its rulers gasped their last breaths in the ruins of their once mighty civilization, the last message sent across the Empire's collapsing network carried only 3 words: humanity is coming. It was the last thing the Empire ever heard. The end came in fire. A final wave of destruction, precise and absolute, sweeping across the last remnants of an empire that had ruled for millennia, gone in a single, brutal instant. And then, silence. The war was over, but humanity remained. They did not celebrate. There were no cheers, no grand proclamations of victory, because this had never been about victory. It had been about revenge, and now, at last, it was complete. The galaxy watched in stunned, paralyzed silence. No empire remained to dictate the laws of the stars. No power stood to replace what had been lost. Only one truth remained, carved into the ruins of history itself. You do not harm humanity and live. The age of the Empire was over, and the age of humanity had begun.